Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So that you are aware, the webcast will only show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verifications Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether you are participating virtually or in person. As is my normal practice, I will waive the yellow card for when you have 30 seconds remaining into your intervention, and I will hold up a red card for when your time is up. I ask for all members and witnesses to be mindful of the cards and to respect your time limit to allow all members to participate. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, December 1st, 2020, the committee is meeting today to continue its study on the domestic manufacturing capacity for a COVID-19 vaccine. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses from the COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force. With us today, we have Joanne Langley, co-chair, Mark Levonin, I know I didn't pronounce that right, Levonin, co-chair, and Roger Scott Douglas, secretary. The panel will have up to 7 minutes to present, followed by rounds of questions. With that, I turn the floor over to the Vaccine Task Force for your presentation.
Good morning. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting us today. I'm really honored to be with you today as a co-chair of Canada's Vaccine Task Force. I think I speak for my colleague, Mark Levonin, who's here, and all task force members to say how privileged we all feel that we are able to serve in this way during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll speak briefly about our vaccine work and then turn over to Mark, who will talk about the biomanufacturing component of our work. So the task force was formed in June 2020 to advise the government on the best strategy to secure safe and effective vaccines for Canadians to mitigate this pandemic. And in order to do so, we looked broadly at 3 aspects of our work: domestic vaccine candidates, international vaccine candidates, and biomanufacturing opportunities. So who are we? We're 11 experts in broad fields. All but one of us are Canadians. We have 1 international member, and we come from fields like clinical medicine, immunology, vaccinology, biomanufacturing, commercialization. We're all volunteers, and we are working in a format where we are looking for the most recent evidence that's available at the time when we're trying to provide advice to the Government of Canada. And that evidence includes literature review, meeting with companies, and meeting with external experts. So we've met with 12 external experts at this point. 6 of those are international and 6 are Canadian. We've also met with task forces from other countries to learn from them as well. So we've been guided by a number of key principles, and probably the most important one is science. The recommendations we make are based on the best available information at the time. Other principles are transparency. We know that the public is interested in our work, and our members have proactively engaged with media on about 135 interviews as of yesterday, I think. We've also participated in outreach events and met with scientific community members across the country, people in academic settings and NGOs and so on. We held our very first meeting on June 16th, and the, the tenor of the room was one of extreme urgency. And we have since met about 39 times. Despite this commitment to transparency, of course, we are dealing with confidential business information. And so the Secretariat put in place a rigorous protocol to declare, manage, and record potential conflicts of interest. This process means that we do end up recusing ourselves from providing advice on projects where there's a conflict or an appearance of one. And this has happened about 30 times so far. All of our potential conflicts are registered on the public access NRC website. So we ultimately, back in the early spring, summer, recommended a portfolio of candidates, a portfolio because we were recognizing that there was a risk that any of these potential candidates might not make it into clinical trials and ultimately to regulatory authorization. Ultimately, the government has announced 7 advanced purchase agreements with promising candidates, and 2 of these are now being rolled out in programs across our provinces and territories. We did recommend purchasing more vaccines than we might potentially need, knowing that some of these might fail and wanting to have safe and effective vaccines for Canadians. We knew that the option for donation of excess vaccines was always available if the vaccines were authorized. We reviewed, with regard to Canadian proposals, 24 Canadian options through the Strategic Innovation Fund. The most promising back in the spring, early summer were Medicago, VBI, and Precision Nanosystems. And other domestic candidates were funded through the National Research Council, those in the Industrial Research Assistance Program. Those include Providence Therapeutics, IMV, Entos, Simvivo, Biodextrous, and Glycovax. These will play an important role in developing Canadian candidates in the more medium term. And I think I will pass over at this point to Mark to discuss the biomanufacturing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. I'd like to start by echoing the remarks of my co-chair. I'm delighted to be with you today. It has truly been an honor to serve on the Vaccine Task Force. I've been struck by how much can get done in a relatively short period of time when you bring together the right people across government, academia, and industry. I've often said that we are operating in battlefield conditions, making recommendations on urgent issues with very limited information. Along with my role as co-chair of the Vaccine Task Force, I chair a subcommittee on biomanufacturing. All members of the vaccine and therapeutics task forces are able to participate in joint biomanufacturing subcommittee meetings. We employ the same rigorous process on declaring interests and recusing ourselves if there's a conflict or the appearance of a material and direct conflict. The Joint Biomanufacturing Subcommittee was tasked with providing advice to the government in 3 areas. First, we were asked to assess biomanufacturing projects proposed to the government under the Strategic Innovation Fund. Secondly, we were asked to develop an overall strategy to increase Canada's biomanufacturing capacity. And thirdly, we advised the government on other biomanufacturing matters related to securing COVID vaccines and therapeutics for Canadians, including efforts to attract international vaccine candidates to manufacture some of their vaccines in Canada. We began meeting on June 23rd of last year, and now the subcommittee has met 22 times for a combined total of about 55 hours. In recommending biomanufacturing proposals, we considered criteria such as demonstrable experience with manufacturing, production planning, readiness, and flexibility, manufacturing facility readiness, solid management and project risk management capabilities, and the potential to contribute to developing Canada's vaccine R&D sector. As with the domestic and international vaccine candidates, we also invited experts from outside of Canada to learn about the ways that other countries, particularly the US and the UK, have built capacity or plan to do so. The Joint Biomanufacturing Subcommittee identified early on that strengthening Canada's biomanufacturing capacity is a key element of our COVID-19 response. Our advice in this area has included recommendations on critical, immediate investments to respond to COVID-19 and on a series of medium to longer term measures which aim to protect the health of Canadians when faced with future pandemics while also promoting economic growth. We reviewed 21 domestic projects, which were for the most part biomanufacturing projects for either vaccines or therapeutics. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. We will now go to our rounds of questions. A gentle reminder to keep an eye on the screen when you see the yellow card. You have 30 seconds remaining. That's for questions and answers. And the red card means the time is up. I'd like to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask their questions. And a gentle reminder to please not speak over each other because translation will have difficulty then translating. With that, we will start with MP Baldinelli. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today. Thank you for that. I just want to follow up on some of the comments that were made and find out specifically in terms of the task force's responsibilities on the data and the research that led them to recommend to the government certain vaccines rather than others.
I could start on that, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. So, as we looked at the candidates from a vaccine point of view, there are some vaccine platforms that have been used in programs since the 1950s when we started to roll out public health programs. And so we would have a lot more experience and knowledge about their technical ability to be ramped up, their safety in big populations. For example, pertussis vaccine or influenza vaccine. During this pandemic, we had some very novel platforms, particularly the mRNAs. So, what we did was look across the entire science of how you evaluate a vaccine, its immune response, the preclinical studies, that is, the studies in animals, any toxicology studies, any evidence in humans, and then all those technical aspects of biomanufacturing that Mark has mentioned to come to a decision and looking at it from all the aspects that we mentioned.
Well, thank you for that. And during your comments, you had mentioned that you were looking at the most recent evidence, including literature reviews and meeting with companies and international experts. And when I talk about that, because as you're aware, we're hearing from stakeholders and you're seeing the stories in the media about perceived kind of conflicts of interest with regards to membership within the task force. So how does the task force go about ensuring that its recommendations were not biased by professional interests of any of its members?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So we had this process in place where potential interests were categorized under 9 categories, and then the impact of those potential interests were considered by the Secretariat. We were overly disclosing any potential interest. I mean, that normally you would disclose something within 3 years. We disclosed things back 20 years, 25 years, just because we were so aware that the integrity of this process ultimately had to do with Canadian citizens' confidence in the process. So we wanted to bend over backwards to make sure everything was made clear. And those are all disclosed. And those people would leave the meeting. I guess ultimately the letter to ministers, which every letter of recommendation from the task force goes dually to ISED and the Minister of Health, Mr. Hajdu, and currently Minister Champagne, and they make the ultimate decision. So we're giving our best advice, but we are not ultimately making the decision, and they are aware of any disclosures that we make.
Now, you mentioned disclosures. Were there recusals of members because of that?
Yes, there were. Thank you, Madam Chair. There were, I think, 29 or 30 instances where people recused.
Okay. Now, quickly, I just want to go to the timeline with regards to the acquisition of the vaccines here in Canada. We can go back to May when the National Research Council entered into the agreement with CanSino. May 12th, the NRC publicly announced the deal. May 16th, the PM then comments on it. And 3 days later, that's when the government became aware that the candidate doses were being held back in China. and it wasn't disclosed to the public until July of that year. And then subsequently in August, the government announces its new agreements with Moderna and Pfizer. Your establishment took place in June. What information was presented to you by the National Research Council or by the government to assist? Were there other candidates that the government had considered at the time or wanted you to proceed and look at before you went ahead with your recommendations to the government on those two vaccines? Because it seems to me that we've lost those 3 critical months, that instead of having another recommendations available, that you were just starting from scratch.
Mhm. Thank you for the question. So I would say that we looked at all the international candidates on the same shelf. So CanSino was one of those international candidates. We were hoping for a domestic candidate, and we very much placed equal emphasis on all the domestic candidates. But ultimately, our goal was a safe and effective vaccine. So CanSino was one of the international candidates, and it was not given preference in any way, I would say.
So, I mean, if you could, I mean, just to follow up when you mentioned Canadian firms. So, how many Canadian-made vaccine production options came forward for your consideration?
So thank you for the question. There were, maybe I'll let Mark chime in here too. So there were at least 24 CIF proposals, but there were other ways that support could be accessed. Mark?
Yes, there were various Canadian proposals at various stages of development. And just to reiterate one of Joanne's points, all of these were done in parallel. So there wasn't looking at CanSino and then waiting to look at others. We looked at the international candidates and the domestic candidates at the same time. And we reviewed all of them carefully in view of what stage of development they were at.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I see you're holding the card. So, thank you for this time.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I first want to say thank you. I very much appreciate your volunteer efforts in the course of this crisis to help us get through this crisis. I'm interested, like many Canadians, I have family in the United States. I have family in the United Kingdom. And there's recent news that the United Kingdom has vaccinated 15 million people. And largely, they've been successful, from what I can tell, because of AstraZeneca in that rollout. And when we look at, I have a few questions going forward, but I first want to spend a little bit of time looking back. And when we look at AstraZeneca in particular, they seem to have had a great head start in their research. The UK obviously entered into an agreement with them at the end of April. And I'm curious what the exploration process was. We've heard some testimony as relates to the NRC and how they could have produced AstraZeneca and have produced similar vaccines previously. And I'm wondering what the exploration was of that opportunity of licensing AstraZeneca and building it at the NRC.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for the question. So every possible candidate was explored, and AstraZeneca was one of them. And our current option is to get it through COVAX. And perhaps Mark or Roger could speak further to the AstraZeneca option.
I would just comment that AstraZeneca, as you know, is one of the 7 vaccines that we recommended. In terms of being able to get it to Canada as quickly as possible, it was deemed that that would be best through providing it from other countries. And there is always the possibility to look at manufacturing vaccines in Canada. But across the board, the shortest time frame for bringing it into Canada was through importing it from other countries.
Can I ask, just follow up? And look, I'm a layperson and I respect your expertise. When I look at the Novavax deal, though, and I'm thankful that we're going to be producing a vaccine and building out that domestic supply, but that timeline from announcement to manufacturing processes up and running seems to, is it possible, had we in July said we're going to license AstraZeneca, we're going to move it to the NRC, we're going to copy what the UK has done effectively in some respects, that we would have had that supply, say, today? Is it possible, do you think?
I think vaccine manufacturing is very complex and it takes time. To think that one could announce a concept to do that and actually sign a licensing deal, do the technology transfer, bring it here, and have it up and running faster than when we expect to receive it. I don't think that would have been possible. The timeframes we're operating under are extremely tight. The fastest it's ever been to develop a vaccine and commercialize it before has been 4 to 5 years. Typically, it takes 10 to 15 years. To think that this is being done within a year is truly remarkable. And to have these vaccines, if you think about where we were a year ago, and to have vaccines being delivered, and including plans for the AstraZeneca vaccine, if it is licensed, when it is licensed, to be coming forth in the second quarter, I think is a pretty remarkable achievement. And I don't think we could have done it faster with any sort of licensing in or tech transfer agreements. Licensing in, tech transfer, Canadian production, all makes sense to pursue, particularly in sort of the medium term. But they would not be part of the solution for 2021.
And why pursue, I suppose, with Novavax? Again, I'm certain a good answer, but why pursue with Novavax and not, say, AstraZeneca, where we know AstraZeneca is already now approved by the EU, by the WHO, by the UK, and Novavax is, I expect, will be successful. I hope will be successful. But why not pursue through NRC in the medium term, as you say, a proven vaccine?
So my understanding is that the government of Canada has spoken with and talked to all of the companies to see who might be interested in doing it, manufacturing in Canada. And it would seem to be that Novavax was a company that wanted to do that. If you look at worldwide supply and capacity for these vaccines, and again, it's unprecedented to make billions of doses of vaccines at a time in a very short period of time. Typically, the constraint is the drug product, the drug substance, the bulk manufacturing, fill and finish, or formulating it and converting it into drug product is the bottleneck. And so to start with looking at how can you have fill and finish capabilities and then transfer bulk manufacturing into Canada certainly is a way to go to fortify us for the intermediate and the longer term.
And my last question is in relation to that medium term. Novavax seems to be a medium term goal to have domestic manufacturing capacity up and running. We'll hopefully have all Canadians vaccinated by then, but there are obviously considerations as it relates to variants, and we should contribute to the global supply as well, because this is obviously a global challenge. When we look at mRNA technology, and it seems, at least with the science we have to date, that mRNA technology seems to be better suited to respond to the variants, at least to date. Who knows, that could change. But do you think we should be, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on supporting Canadians, individuals, and businesses through this pandemic? Should we not be spending a significant amount to build out mRNA capacity here in Canada?
Well, there have been a number of SIF proposals that we've reviewed, and there have been some investments. One of them is Precision Nanosystems, where investment has been made to expand the mRNA capacity there. There's other proposals that are under discussion, and the government is committed to investing in biomanufacturing capacity.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est le...
Next question goes to MP Lemire. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witness for appearing before the committee today. This was something we had hoped to see and have been waiting for. My question is this. Since January 11, 2020, we know that Canada had in hand the sequencing of the virus. On January 20th, a first case of COVID was announced publicly. On January 16th, according to the information received, was the first meeting of the group of experts. Decisions were made between the 26th of January and June. Do you know whether or not decisions were taken, how the decision-making process unfolded, and who did the government consult in the 5 months between the first COVID case and between that meeting?
But I understand you related the timelines for the pandemic and asked who made the decision about the task force and who they consulted. And I think that would be a question for the Secretariat. Would that be correct, Roger?
Yeah, happy to answer, Joanne. The task force was constructed in May of 2020 and held its first meeting in June 16th of 2020. Until that time, there were other groups that were also advising the government. The Chief Science Officer, for instance, Dr. Mona Namer, has other committees that supported expert advice. There were also obviously significant science capabilities within Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, and this expertise was also drawn on in those early months as the vaccine task force is being established.
So we understand that before referring to you, some time was lost. There was a bit of improvisation at the government, but let me continue. So in June 2020, the activities of the committee remained secret for at least 6 weeks. The committee met. You made recommendations to the federal government, but the public nor did elected members know exactly about this. Who sat on this committee? To which companies they were tied? Why did this remain secret for 6 weeks? Are there safeguards in place for the conflicts and interests that existed at that time?
Could answer that question, Madam Chair. The committee was established as I mentioned, early June. As Joanne indicated in her opening remarks, an extraordinary amount of work was done by these volunteer experts in the immediate months thereafter. As soon as the appropriate due diligence could be done, both by committee members and then also, and importantly, as Joanne mentioned, it was advice that was being given. So therefore, before approval could take place, experts within the Ministry of ISED and other groups were reviewing and doing follow-up due diligence. And as soon as that had been done and agreements were able to be signed on August the 5th, that was made public, and all of the names and roles that had been played by the task force were made public at that point.
In terms of the money allocated, we know that there was a decision made to take CanSino as a partner. It was taken by the government. In fact, that was the first decision that the committee took in June during its first meeting. However, the agreement signed with China occurred in August. This 55 million that was earmarked for CanSino, was this money spent?
To answer that question, it's not quite factually correct, Madam Chair. The task force was asked to review proposals, SIF proposals, and international candidates. As Joanne mentioned, CanSino was one of a number. There were 19 international projects companies looked at. There were 24 Canadian companies that were examined. CanSino was in that mix. They were reviewed initially by the task force. Further evidence was provided, and the task force ruled that their advice to ministers was that new science suggested not backing CanSino further. The relationship between the National Research Council and CanSino was entirely independent of anything that the task force was doing. The early relationship that you were talking about was independent of the task force advice.
I understand, but at the heart of the Canadian strategy was to use CanSino as a partner. Who made that decision? And has that 55 million been spent for CanSino, or is that money still there?
I think that, Madam Chair, with great respect, CanSino was not at the heart of the Canadian strategy by any means. It was a much more balanced approach. The task force, as Joanne and Mark have indicated, recommended strongly for a diversified portfolio, both across vaccine platforms and across companies. At all times, full court press was put on all fronts. There was no effort made by anybody to privilege one company over another, and certainly not CanSino.
So you did not recommend CanSino?
was initially recommended, and then when further evidence materialized, the advice was given not to recommend pursuing it.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. For you're having difficulty with translation, please let us know. But make sure that if you need translation, that on the bottom of your screen that you've selected English. Just so, and if you're having difficulty, let me know so we can make sure IT reaches out to you. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massé. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for our witnesses to be here and for your work. One of the things that's crucial is public confidence. There's no doubt that we're recommending what people put in their bodies to fight a deadly situation. And some people have already reservations about vaccines. Some people have reservations about the length of time it should be tested and so forth. And one of the best things that we can do is provide more openness and accountability for that. And one of the concerns that I've had with regards to the task force is the transparency aspect. You mentioned the NRC site and with the declaration of interest, conflict of interest, and I have that and I've looked at it. And I'll just read one, Ms. Langley, you recused yourself for, noted that you worked at the university, collaborated with Janssen in the past on clinical trials. And then action taken is, as there is no direct material linkages, it was not considered a conflict and recusal was not deemed necessary. That's not a lot of information for Canadians to see. And so I want to know, is that the same or equivalent to when you publish conflict of interest in journals and other types of materials? Because if you just look at the surface of that, it doesn't really explain a lot. And then from those conflict of interest that were declared, I think only I found one or two where action was taken. So maybe you can comment on those things, please. I'm sorry, you're on mute still.
Sorry. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, I can speak to the question about me, and then Roger perhaps could do the second part. So you're right. It's very similar to what we do for journals. So every trial that we publish the results for, we have to go through, or every talk that we give, particularly in a university, we have to have a slide that lists every company that our employer had a relationship with. So for me, for example, I'm a professor at a university at Dalhousie. I'm an employee of the university. When we do clinical trials here at the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, some of our funding would be from CIHR, some of it might be from a company like Janssen doing a phase 1 trial. So the money would negotiate a contract. It would be the university with the company, and then the money would be used to pay the research nurses that we have, so on. So none of the money in Canada, when you do those kinds of clinical trials, goes to investigators, at least when you're in an academic setting. So I think that answers the Janssen. We had previously done Janssen studies.
Yeah. So, but that you're saying then that this website that's from the NRC though is equivalent to what you have to do for the journals and other types of conflict of interest. I'm just looking to find out whether this is equivalent in terms of disclosure of information and the way it's actually being done here.
So I can tell you what the disclosure was to the NRC. So I listed every possible relationship that I would have had to Janssen. Not all of those would have been listed potentially.
Okay, so it's not equivalent to what you have to provide for journals and other types of conflict of interest declaration then?
Well, no, journals are very different, so you can't make a general statement about journals. I think would be
okay.
fair
Well,
to say.
I don't know how this is a difficult question. I mean, I'm really just trying to find out whether what's being published on the NRC website is as robust as what's normally disclosed during when you publish in journals and so forth. That's all I'm kind of looking for.
Perhaps I could just jump in. Thank you, Joanne. Madam Chair, a very exhaustive effort was done to make sure that the conflict of interest protocols used by the task force were the equivalent to all major granting bodies. We looked at carefully what CIHR had done. We looked at other countries, what they had done. This meets all of the same kinds of tests. There were rigorous declarations. Joanne had mentioned that in all of the cases, about 30 people recused themselves when they were found to have a direct conflict or the appearance of one. In the cases that that are on the website, NRC website, these are the announced projects by the government, and there are 8 cases of recusal in those projects that have been announced where the advice of the task force was taken by the government and investments were made. So it meets the very highest standards.
So
you spoke about credibility.
Yeah,
the task force members are incredibly.
No, I sorry, I don't want to. I just running out of time here. So you're saying that it is equivalent on this website disclosure to when you publish journals and so forth. That's what I was just trying. That's what I've been trying to get to in my questioning here. So but it sounds to me as also that you're only disclosing the ones that have to be are from the government. So there are other disclosures that haven't gone public. Then is that correct?
All that is disclosed is where the advice of the task force has been acted on by the government.
Okay,
ministers receive a full list of all of the declarations for every item of advice.
So the public doesn't have any access to those other conflicts. I only have 2 minutes left, and I just want to ask: in the United States, they're webcasting and providing much more robust access to the public. Why aren't we doing that here in our country, especially given the fact that we have virtually integrated economies? And where I sit right now, I can get in my car, and if I could cross the border, get a vaccine at Myers department store in 10 minutes. We're quite integrated. So why aren't we webcasting?
Very quickly, because you're out of time.
We looked at all the other task forces, including Warp Speed. What Canada's doing is largely equivalent to what everybody else is doing. There's a great deal of confidential business information, and that necessitates that meetings be held in confidence. The same as almost every other task force.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to Député Police. Vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Currently, we're trying to put together the chronology, the timeline of what took place from the beginning. We know that on May 13th, the Cancino partnership made an announcement with the Tallahassee. There was a partnership announced where Miss Langley works, and you're a professor of research at Tallahassee. You must have found that Cancino was a good option for the vaccine, where some had mentioned that Cancino had not been retained as a candidate. So we're having trouble following this. On May 19th as well, Cancino withdrew and ended the agreement. Then June 16th, your group was struck. And then you started holding meeting. And August 5th, it was announced at the same time that we heard the announcement with Pfizer and Moderna. You were announced. So there are a number of gray areas here. The first, Cancino with Dalhousie. If Mrs. Langley, you were there and you had taken part in signing this agreement, why is Mr. Duda telling us that the vaccine was not efficient? It was not effective.
Thank you for the question and for the opportunity to clarify that. So I would separate quite clearly clinical development and research from choosing vaccines to buy for Canada. So we do here at the Centre for Vaccinology in Dalhousie a number of very early vaccine studies. Most of those never make it forward to be manufactured or scaled up or used. It's very early clinical research, and that was the relationship with the this adenovector virus vaccine platform that Cancino had. So we were to do the phase 1 trial, and so we were all ready to do that and enroll people, and we're just waiting for arrival of vaccine. So that's quite different from the task force as a whole, considering it as a potential candidate that might make it through the whole clinical development program to be a safe and effective vaccine.
Okay. Merci, madame.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but I have very little time left. I'd like to shed some light on the period of June 16th. That is the first meeting until August 5th, when the group's existence was announced. According to the answers I've heard, and what my colleagues asked, it wasn't clear whether or not there was conflict of interest. I'd like to know this. The declaration that is called the Protocol of Declaration of Interest, is it dated June 16th or August 5th? That's my first question to you.
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. The conflict of interest protocols went into effect at the very first meeting on June 16th. Everybody was bound by them. In all of the deliberations between June 16th and August 5th announcement, they were being adhered to rigorously. The announcements on August 5th for the Pfizer and Moderna do include declarations of interest, but there were no conflicts. There's an important distinction between when an interest is declared in the way that Joanne described, the relationship that the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology has with CanSino and many other. It's a research center of international repute, so there's many companies, very many companies that deal with it. So to work with them is a declaration of an interest. It's very important, but it's not a conflict in any sense that Joanne personally benefits in any way from the relationship that her institute and university have with a client.
Merci.
And that would be well accepted everywhere.
Merci, M. Douglas. Là-dessus, je vous...
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. In Le Devoir this morning, we were saying that Canadians have a right to know if decisions that were made for future vaccines were made in the public interest or for private interest. You have so many hours of meetings. Are the names and the hours written somewhere of these meetings?
Yes, indeed. Everything is documented, and all of the minutes are kept of the meetings, and letters are sent to ministers. Initially Haidu and Baines, now Haidu and Champagne. There's full transparency to the decisions that the government takes. The task force, as Joanne drew an important distinction between providing advice and actually making a decision on something. The task force only provides advice. It doesn't. It is appropriate that if the government is held to account for decisions against it.
Donc, j'aimerais que...
All right. I would like those documents to be submitted to committee so they can be consulted by our members. I don't think I have much time left. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Goes to MP Jacek. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all three of our witnesses, specifically Dr. Langley and Mr. Levonen, for your many hours of volunteer work. I think all Canadians should be most grateful for your expertise. My first question is for Mr. Levonen. I first met you when you were president of Sanofi Pasteur and had the opportunity to visit your manufacturing facility on Steeles in Toronto. In fact, I think I first visited when it was Connaught. Could you explain for the committee exactly what goes into building a biomanufacturing facility? There seems to be some sort of idea that you snap your fingers and you put up a building, bricks and mortar, and you're ready to go. So could you just explain the complexity in putting together such a biomanufacturing facility?
Thank you for the question. And I was with Connaught and Sanofi Pasteur for 33 years, retired from that organization in December 2016, having served the last 17 years as president. The campus that you're referring to is over 50 acres at Dufferin and Steeles, has over 1 million square feet of space, and it is still alive and well in manufacturing diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, and polio vaccines in combination for Canada and the world. Typically speaking, it would take 4 to 5 years to put a building up there and to qualify it and to begin production. And that would be the same for manufacturing processes. We are talking about traditional kind of vaccine manufacturing processes. So there was no mRNA vaccines manufactured there, but they are the typical inactivated and protein-based vaccines. But it would typically take 4 to 5 years to get something up and running and to be able to produce product there.
And does that relate to security, biosecurity, some of the features of the building that are required?
Yes. Over the years, the quality assurance, the desire to make sure vaccines to assure quality as opposed to the testing has risen dramatically. So there are all sorts of efforts around not just getting regulatory approval for the vaccines, but for the site itself, for all the compliance procedures. There are more people involved now in testing and making sure that the vaccines have quality assurance and compliance than there are in actually making the bulk product.
And to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Erskine Smith's comments related to the UK, apparently they were able to be ahead of the game and put their manufacturing facility in action within the last year. I have heard some evidence that, in fact, they started a little sooner, even pre-pandemic. There was a feeling within the UK that there was a need for such a facility. Are you aware of the timelines related to the facility in the UK?
My understanding is that they had considered making some investments before the pandemic. So this is something they had thought about and had plans in place and designs underway. They were able to hit the ground floor running, so to speak, in making those investments. They were fortunate that they had some domestic candidates available, ready to go. And so they were able to move it along quite quickly, which is remarkable when you think it was just not even a year ago that we were really first starting to deal with this. They were first starting to think about it. So they had a number of advantages that went their way, and the timing was very fortuitous, and they're benefiting from that.
Thank you. Dr. Langley, I wanted to pursue the issue of some of the domestic vaccine candidates that you assessed. We heard on Tuesday from Providence, as you may well know, and they certainly expressed considerable dissatisfaction, disappointment in the type of grant that they received through the National Research Council. Could you just go through some of the thinking that went on, the kind of data that you required at each step of the way in terms of assessing domestic vaccines and perhaps particularly Providence itself? You're on mute, Dr. Langley.
I'm so sorry. Providence would have been considered along with all the domestic candidates, and a very systematic, similar process was considered for each one. So they had submitted an application. So we had the application to look at. We had interviews where they came before the committee and made presentations, and there was an opportunity for every task force member to ask them questions. In some instances, we actually did video walkthroughs of offices, had follow-up meetings where things were unclear, just to give every domestic proponent a chance to fully present their case. I think that would describe our process. And then some were ready to go to a...
My apologies, unfortunately,
Okay.
you're over time. Maybe you'll be able to answer that at a subsequent round.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. Our next round of questions, c'est Député Simard, vous avez la...
Mr. Simard, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Ms. Langley, is interpretation working well? Yes? Good. I have a quick question for you. You probably know the English model, the partnership that led to AstraZeneca. And I was wondering if your group studied the possibility of creating a partnership, a Canadian partnership, that could have used your expertise and the expertise for Medicago. And we also know that Miss McMaster's University had moved forward quite a bit. Was that possibility of a Canadian partnership, was that explored by your group?
So thank you. So I think you're asking, in my work at the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, did we have discussions with AstraZeneca? We are certainly very aware of the group at Oxford, and collaborate with them, but they were not looking for a partnership with to do studies.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm wondering, your task force, did they study the possibility of doing the same kind of partnership, but in Canada, with Canadian researchers?
Yes, for every single candidate that we considered, part of the rubric was the possibility to partner with Canadian scientists or businesses or government scientists to make it a value option for Canadians. So every vaccine was considered under that lens.
All right. And it never led to anything, if I understand correctly.
Il n'y a pas eu de financement du gouvernement.
There was no federal government financing in order to launch a task force that would have been entirely Canadian for the production of a vaccine.
Maybe I could answer briefly. Madam Chair, the Honourable Member mentioned Medicago, so there was direct support in the order of about 173 million, I think, provided by the Government of Canada to support Medicago. As Joanne indicated, at every opportunity, pairing up international candidates with Canadian science or Canadian biomanufacturing capability was assessed. The problem, as Mark explained, is that in order to produce billions of doses, which is what the big companies were trying to do, they needed a very well-established, major available facility, and that was not found in Canada.
Je comprends. Merci, Monsieur Douglas.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Like to oh, your time is up. I'm sorry, Mr. Simard. You're out of time, but perhaps at another round.
Goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. MP Massey?
Yeah, sorry, I was struggling with my my mouse. Thanks very much. I just want to follow up with because I still think that the task force transparency is important, and I trying to get my head around why the United States can publish its conclusions, its agenda, be on a webcast, and we can't have any of that here or partial of that. Please explain why the U.S. can do this and we can't. You noted disclosure of corporate secrets, but what's the difference between the U.S. dealing with this and their transparency versus our current model?
I'm afraid I can't, Madam Chair, speak fully to the what the Americans are doing and how they can do it. What I can say is that in virtually every case, when we interviewed a biomanufacturing company, a vaccine company, it was necessary for the members of the task force to sign non-disclosure agreements. That is what the companies required. They did the same for the UK task force, I know as a matter of fact, and Australian, the New Zealand task forces. We spoke to all of these. They entered into the same kind of confidentiality, and everybody is playing by that by those rules. That I can say.
Okay. Do you even publish your agenda and conclusions though after meetings or any minutes?
No, we do not.
Why?
All of that advice and detail is provided to by the task force to the ministers of innovation, science, and industry, and the minister of health.
See, this is what the problem is. I think for the public is immense amount of public money in decision making about what they're going to do with their body is not even like a base agenda or some conclusions is provided for them to see what's even being talked about. I mean, sending it to the minister isn't sufficient for us as members of parliament either, because all we can do is do an access to information request later on and probably get a redacted document that looks all black. I mean, is there not any space for the task force to open up its, I guess, some type of connection to the Canadians that you're working so hard to try to keep safe?
I think that
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, MP Amos.
Thank you. The member opposite is asking a question about the relationship of advice being provided to a minister of the Crown. That I mean, these are scientific experts. They're not experts in Canadian democratic process or government decision making.
And they're intelligent human beings.
Of course, and no one brings that into question.
MP Massey, I'm trying
to them.
MP Massey, I am trying to hear the point of order. Please, one moment. MP Amos, please continue. What is the point of order?
So the point of order, Madam Chair, is that the member is asking a question that the witness is ill-suited to answer because it speaks to what the rules around advice to ministers of the Crown, which the member opposite knows full well is protected under cabinet confidentiality.
Understood. The witness has very briefly whether or not he can answer that he can decide whether or not he can answer that, and I'll ask him to quickly respond because we are out of time.
I think, Madam Chair, that it is right that the Minister of the Crown would answer that question, but I would point out, as Joanne mentioned, that transparency is very important. Task force members have met with the media and given extensive interviews 135 times, which is quite an extraordinary thing for volunteer people to do.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I think, when we're talking about cabinet confidentiality and so on, I just want to take you back to a point here in this committee. The minister testified that the Liberal government's decision to partner with the Chinese was based on recommendations from the Vaccine Task Force. And of course, that was done earlier. June 23rd is when I first heard that you had said that you had started your committee up. So there's some confusion there. So that's, I think, part of, and I know I've heard some description of the time frame, which is great. But I guess my first question is, were you made aware that the government knew that their agreement with the Chinese was doomed to failure just a few weeks after it was signed, based on the things that we've heard throughout the media?
Maybe I could answer, Madam Chair. The CanSino did come before the committee to make representation in the context of support for clinical trials and for an advanced purchase agreement. This happened later than what the NRC's relationship with CanSino was. In the early indications, you will remember that CanSino was among the very leading companies at that point, one of the very few that was entering to phase 3 clinical trials, that put it almost at the top of the pack. That then subsequently was proven to be problematic. And the government then received advice to no longer support the CanSino.
Okay, and I think that becomes the point, because it seemed as though we put all our eggs in that particular basket, which may not be fair. However, there is this great time lag between when they realized that it wasn't going to work, and we started to talk to other groups. And I know that a lot of that discussion would have been going on anyway. But that's really the major frustration. And of course, when people look at a 3-4 month time lag, you start to say, well, this is where our economy then is suffering, because we haven't been able to get to that. I want to talk too about the secrecy side of it, and it extends to contracts and things that we've signed. There doesn't seem to be a problem with every one of these companies and other countries. You have indicated that there are some that treat these non-disclosure agreements in the same way that we do. But the reason why I ask that question is that right now we've got provinces that are saying, we can't wait. We need to find how we can start ramping up our own production for our own rollout plans. So how can the provinces really put an effective plan in place when they aren't getting information from the federal government and such through your organization?
Madam Chair, the question, although terribly important, really has no bearing on the Vaccine Task Force. The Vaccine Task Force, Joanne and Mark, did meet with the federal and provincial ministers of health. Joanne and Mark have also met with the deputy ministers of health. They've been fully transparent about the work of the task force in those two bodies.
Okay,
so
great.
That relationship's there, but they have the Vaccine Task Force has no relationship with vaccine rollout.
Okay, thanks. And so thank you. So then if you could ask this question. We are talking about the licensing in Canada, and that becomes the holdup that we have right now. We have the EU, they know what they're doing. We have the US, we have other countries around the world, but it always seems as though there's a roadblock for us to be able to make those kinds of decisions. Is there any thought, and would the Vaccine Task Force start taking a look at those agreements and approvals that are taken outside of Canada and making it a priority so that we could speed up some of these applications?
Mark, do you want to handle that?
Sure. If we're talking about the approvals, and thank you for the question, of the licenses for products that are licensed in different places around the world, one of the things that Joanne talked about and has just been paramount to everything we've done is that science should rule the day. And while great progress has been made in compressing regulatory approval timelines from 10 plus years, 4 to 5 years to 12 to 18 months, none of the steps have been skipped. They've been done in parallel. And science rules the day means when Health Canada approves these products, that's when they should be approved. They are going through their own governance process, and we support that science rules the day. And then Health Canada has a mechanism for deciding when and when not to approve products.
Okay, I see my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Johari. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you for your volunteerism, and thank you for your expertise and passion, and the commitment that you have to make sure that you provide the best advice to the government to keep us safe. I'm going to split my time between Madam Langley and Mr. Levonen. Let me start with Mr. Levonen. Can you, based on your experience, give us an understanding of, from a manufacturing process as well as a manufacturing setup, biomanufacturing setup, what is the difference between the mRNA and the traditional vaccine, and whether any of our domestic candidates were suitable to be able to ramp up an mRNA model in a very short time?
So the mRNA technology is new. It's been around for 10 years in terms of the science, but there has never until now been a product commercialized using RNA technology. So this is a great breakthrough. And as a globe, as a world, I think we're very fortuitous that the RNA technology was there and we could take advantage of that. So it's been able to come on stream very quickly. Much more quickly than the traditional vaccines. And you'll see some of the other groups of the 7 APAs we recommended are further along. Protein subunit vaccines, for example, which are Novavax and Sanofi GSK, they are taking longer and would take a longer time to get up and running.
I apologize for interrupting, but from a manufacturing, let's say, what needed to change in Connaught for us to be able to start manufacturing an mRNA-based solution from a manufacturing and ISO standard?
So right now, Connaught Sanofi Pasteur does not have RNA technology in place for their manufacturing. So they would have to gear that up and they would have to start to build a facility that could do that manufacturing. To your earlier point, there are other candidate vaccines in Canada that are working with RNA technology, and they're at an earlier stage.
Okay, and uniqueness about the manufacturing process is what that makes those domestic candidates suitable for mRNA manufacturing?
Well, it's different equipment. It's different bulk manufacturing equipment. It's a different way of utilizing it. And so it's just a different manufacturing technique for the bulk product.
Could they coexist in the same facility as the traditional vaccine manufacturer?
You could put RNA technology into an existing manufacturing site. It would likely be a new building, new equipment, renovating a new room. It would be different equipment.
And you kind of highlighted the timeline for that. I thank you for that. I'm going to move to Madam Langley. I'm going to follow up on the response that I was hoping to get from my colleague MP Helena Jasek. Can you tell us what criteria did the task force use to be able to shortlist from the 300 vaccine candidate to 7, and how did you decide on the diversity of it? You got now fully 2 minutes to be able to respond to that.
Okay. All right. So ultimately, we came up with 3 platforms. There are about 5 or 6 that are out there being explored. So the adenovirus vector, the protein, and the virus-like particle, and the mRNA. So what we did was look at each stage that you would consider in clinical development. So testing in animals was an immune response elicited. Did the animals survive? Were they protected when you challenged them? Then you look at the purity of the product. Then you look at the ability to manufacture. How close are they to testing in humans? Because you have to be able to test in humans to see if it even produces an immune response in humans. So then they go through the phase 1, 2, 3 testing, ramping up to this phase 3 trial. This is the first time in history. So for the Moderna vaccine, the phase 3 trial started in July. That is absolutely marvelous. And so they were so far ahead of any other candidate, the mRNA, and their ability to ramp up, that gave them evidence that we could say they would be likely to be a successful candidate. Then there's all the manufacturing expertise, which Mark has spoken of.
Thank you. With 30 seconds to go, I'm going to go
Okay,
down
sorry.
to the bottom line of it is, did our task force produce any result that is not consistent, or any recommendation that is not consistent with other task force in other countries?
That's a very interesting question, because they are very similar across countries. That we chose these similar platforms, and they're the successful ones. It's absolutely amazing that there are at least six vaccines now that are safe and effective in humans, and the Canadian ones are in the leaders. So that's just wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That finishes our second round. We will start our third round. I'm going to try my best to see if we can get everyone in, but I know time is pressing. So our first round of questions goes to MP Poilievre. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Oh. I'm already a smash hit on the committee.
I won't start until you do.
Finance committee, we don't use Zoom. We use pigeons to send messages back and forth. So I'm just adapting to all the technology here at industry. My question is about the rate of vaccination in Canada. There are various measurements to determine the per capita rate of vaccination in comparable countries, but all of them show that there are at least 30 and perhaps as many as 50 countries that have vaccinated much higher per capita rates than we have here in Canada. To what do you attribute this failure?
The rollout is actually not within the remit of the task force. So I could answer as an individual, but not in my capacity on the task force.
Sure, go ahead as answering as an individual then.
Okay, so being involved in vaccine work for 2 decades now, we have this unique situation in Canada where we're 13 little countries. And so any vaccine that's authorized federally has to be rolled out according to each province and territory. Many countries in the world have national vaccine programs, the UK, Australia, the US, where the model is that the federal government procures vaccines and then every member of that country has access to it.
Right. So just to be clear, the provincial role is just in the delivery and the administration of the vaccine, not in the procurement, right?
Well, in the non-pandemic scenario, they also procure and make decisions.
But in the pandemic scenario, so just to be, let's just get right to it. In the pandemic scenario, all they do is administer and deliver, not procure, correct?
That is my understanding of what is the case now.
And so I just want to get right, nail it down then. That's not the delay. Nobody, the provinces are administering what they have. The delay is in the procurement. So to try and pass the buck to the provinces is not accurate. Right now, the delay is in procuring the vaccines. That's a federal issue. And we should not use federalism to pass the buck. The federal government is uniquely and exclusively responsible for this, and it has not done it. Why is it that at least 30 and maybe as many as 50 countries have been able to deliver vaccines in a way that the federal government has not here in Canada?
I might just mention that the issue is not so much procurement. The procurement started with advanced procurement agreements is August 5th. There was then the requirement that went right up through the fall. We were extremely successful, as Joanne and Mark
Mr.
indicated,
Douglas,
in
Mr.
choosing
Douglas, my question is
performers.
about the outcome. My question is about the outcome. And right now, there are 30 countries ahead of us, maybe 50, depending on how you measure it. Why are they doing it and we aren't? Why?
So the procurement is not the issue. The second step, as Joanne indicated, is the authorization. Those countries need to authorize those. Health Canada has authorized 2. They're seriously considering 2 more and imminently perhaps passing judgment on those. All of those have been wisely chosen by the task force in advance, and the government has accepted
Why
that
is it
advice.
that at least 30 and as many as 50 countries have higher levels of per capita vaccination rates than Canada? Why?
Many of these other countries had in country capacity to produce the vaccines, and that their countries authorized those vaccines earlier on, and the combination of those 2 things allowed them to get out front. They also didn't meet the unforeseen delays in the delivery of the vaccine once it had been procured and authorized.
Even though they would have the same logistical obstacles that we have here in Canada.
Well, European countries and UK don't have those barriers.
Why?
Well, they're located in the manufacturing takes place. For instance, the AstraZeneca takes place in the UK, and the UK had authorized AstraZeneca prior to us. They had received data from the clinical trials prior to Health Canada had
exactly. So they authorized before we did. That was that's a performance issue on the part of their government versus our government. And then you've got other countries who are importing vaccines who have significant advances in vaccination rates on us. So it's not just the fact that we don't have domestic production, a failure of this government in and of itself, but it is the fact that we have not been able to adequately to purchase and deliver
that's
those
your
vaccines.
time, MP Paldiev. My apologies to stop you, but you're out of time. Our next round of questions goes to MP Lambropoulos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just I lost track of time here. So thank you to all of our witnesses for being with us today and for all Canadians get vaccinated and as safely as possible. We do appreciate all of the work that you've done, and we appreciate you being here today. So my questions are more about what we've been hearing. I know I feel personally very confident in what the government has been saying, which is that we'll get Canadians vaccinated by September, and that we'll do so safely and efficiently. And I have full confidence in our ministers that are involved in this and in the vaccine task force. However, as we've heard many times on the news and from the opposition on several occasions, they believe that the timeline won't be met, and this instills fear in Canadians. They fear for the safety of themselves, of their loved ones. They fear for the businesses that remain closed and, you know, their livelihood. And so I'd like to hear from you, the people who I believe have some kind of authority in telling Canadians the truth about this matter, when you believe Canadians will be vaccinated, and if you can also give us an explanation as to why you believe the government did take the right decisions in going ahead the way that they did with regards to vaccines.
Maybe I could just comment on a couple of things based on my experience in the vaccine industry. So the vaccines are coming. We've seen them, the delivery schedules and what's being happening this week versus delayed till next week. I don't think anybody in the industry ever thought they would see that on the national news like it's happening with the pandemic, which is understandable. It is true that when and we provided advice to the government. We've not implemented the procurement agreements. So again, I won't speak from knowledge of these particular agreements, but I will speak from traditional industry knowledge. Supply agreements usually are done on a quarterly basis. One would commit to their reasonable commercial efforts to supply vaccines over a period of time by quarters, which seems to be what's being reported in the media. There are delays in traditional supply of vaccines that have happened over the years all the time. Vaccines are very difficult to make. They're very difficult to supply. So to have delays occur from time to time, to have slippages of a week or so, well, it creates a significant impact during a pandemic. It's quite routine in the normal vaccine business, so it's understandable. And one would expect that the companies, and they've reported that they will be able to make the commitments that they've met and that they are committing to supplying sufficient vaccines so that there will be enough available for all Canadians to be vaccinated by the end of September. That's what the companies are reporting based on what they know. That's what the government is reporting. And one would hope and expect that we'll see an increase in our vaccine supply on a weekly basis starting very shortly, again, as has been reported by the companies and the media.
And while you've played an integral role in helping the government come up with the plan and making these decisions, can you comment on how efficiently they are doing this and how why other options may have not been as efficient? I know that you mentioned several times that international candidates as well as domestic candidates were being evaluated at the same time. Can you just give us a little bit more as to why it was important to go with the most promising vaccines first and maybe focus on domestic production a little bit later on in the game?
So if you take a step back in time to July and August, June, July, August, when we were getting going, it's a bit of a mind-boggling task that we were given to recommend. Our mandate was to provide advice to secure safe and efficacious vaccines for Canadians as soon as possible. At that time, there were no vaccines licensed or developed. They were underway for being developed, but you had international candidates, you had domestic candidates, and we had to assess, review, meet with companies, come up with recommendations about what vaccines might be available in the future. And when we provided advice to the government, the 7 candidate vaccines that we recommended across 3 platforms weren't even approved yet. So there was a risk in buying and securing and entering into agreements for products that weren't even licensed yet. And the government took our advice, they reacted to it, and moved to quickly secure advanced purchase agreements.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est...
The next turn is Member Lemire. We have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So as we know, the minutes of these meetings are not public. It's a rather opaque process, and it seems to be quite arbitrary. So what criteria has the committee based itself to not choose a company compared to choosing another company?
The criteria are the scientific and technical merit, Madam Chair, which are standard for each case. And I don't want to take the members' time, but they're the aspects that I mentioned, the subcategories of safety, efficacy, animal data, good manufacturing practice, and so on.
What about the financial aspect, the taxpayers' money? Is that something you take into account in your considerations, or is it only on a scientific basis?
So technical merit, the ability of the teams to bring their projects through to completion was considered. The actual due diligence on each proponent was done by ISED. Would that be correct, Roger?
Yes, it's a combination of scientific and technical advice being provided by the Vaccine Task Force, and then appropriate and thorough due diligence on financial management aspects of the firms that was carried out further by ISED, explaining in some cases the delay between advice to proceed and the announcement of it having happened. Some of these things are when millions of dollars are being spent, careful and thorough financial advice, due diligence needs to be done.
Is the government satisfied with how all of your recommendations are being implemented? Is there anything that the government has not put into place? How do you judge that performance? And also, how will you take into account all of the investments and expenditures that are part of this process?
I would say that it is very much an iterative process. So as we get new information, we will reevaluate our advice and are continuing to do so. So it's very much new knowledge is becoming available from all these aspects continuously, and we will consider it and the merits of it as time goes on.
But at the government, are there any things that the government has not implemented? Any of the recommendations that the government has not implemented?
The scientific advice with regards to procurements, that advice has been taken in a very, very timely manner. I that's what I would say. Mark, would you have anything to add to that?
Very quickly, you're out of time.
Okay.
Well, only that the advice that we give is confidential, and so what the government has done or not done with that advice is up to them. I would leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Our next round.
What about the public?
Next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't want my questions to be interpreted as a lack of appreciation for the volunteering and the work that the task force is doing. But they do center around the transparency aspect. Because of the conflict of interest potentials are a landmine field that is huge and vast. And you're making decisions and advice. And the previous answer to the question and exchange shows the vulnerability we have is because we can't even get commentary as to when advice wasn't taken. So I guess my question is this, is that when you actually do send something to the minister, do you actually get an official response about that? Is there a document produced that goes back to the task force explaining why the government did or did not take action?
We provide advice to ministers, but we don't get a document back. Roger, do you want to handle the process?
Yeah, the advice goes to the ministers from the task force co-chairs, and there's not a formal letter back or direct acknowledgement of that advice by ministers. What there is being, though, are a great number of announcements on the advice given and the decisions taken by the government to fund proposals recommended. And I think, Madam Chair, it is very important to draw the distinction between decision making and advice giving. The task force makes no decisions. It simply provides advice to ministers. They make all the decisions.
Okay, and with that, has there been, without saying a particular one, have there been decisions made that took partial of your advice?
These would be better, Madam Chair, questions answered directly by the minister. But I think I can say, generally speaking, that both the advice given and the action taken by the government has been both extremely. The task force has worked flat out. Advice is being given very, very quickly. Due diligence is done as quickly as possible, and the government has acted on the recommendations of the task force with alacrity.
Yeah, well, yeah, but here's the problem, though, for us, and I think the general public, as we continue to go down this road without the vaccination, is there still is just a lack of clarity in terms of public accountability. And I thank you for your volunteerism. It's not a criticism of yourself or your actions or the time you're spending. It's about the process.
Thank you very much, MP Massey. We're going to finish this round, and I want to thank the witnesses for staying a little longer so we can finish this round. The next round of questions goes to MP Epp. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Being new to this committee and subbing in, I've listened. I've done a bit of work, but I will admit that I am new to this file. So maybe my questions have been covered. So please bear with me. I'm going to go back to a response that Mr. Scott Douglas gave to our colleague, Mr. Lemire, with the CanSino relationship predating this task force. I understood you to say that this task force did not recommend that. Yet when I look at the briefing notes that I received from the Library of Parliament, the Honourable Minister of Health stated that the decision to go with CanSino was guided by the advice of the task force experts. So can you clarify that for me in my mind exactly? It seems to be conflicting information that's put in front of me.
Perhaps the distinction is the following. The relationship that the National Research Council struck with CanSino Biologics was to support clinical trial work and then potentially to produce under emergency pandemic conditions vaccines that might be made available if those clinical trials prove to be successful. the vaccine task force was not part of those discussions because they predated the existence of the task force. However, subsequently, CanSino was looking for funding for clinical trials, and they were also a candidate among many international candidates because at that point they were among world leaders for advanced purchase agreements. And in that case, initially, the minister is quite right that there were recommendations given by the task force to support CanSino. Subsequently, though, it became clear that the performance of CanSino was not what was initially expected, and the relationship and the delivery of the seed for production in Canada changed, and the task force changed its advice.
Thank you. I'm going to go to also an earlier response from this meeting. Ms. Langley, you mentioned the outcomes, the deliberations, the process that this task force has gone under is very, very similar to other task forces around the world. And yet, Canada lags behind. And so where is the difference? And if the outcomes, the process, the recommendations coming from this task force mirror the outcomes in task forces in other countries and other settings, why do we as Canadians seem to be lagging behind, or are we not lagging behind?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Mark said, the procurements are in place and the timelines are really quarterly rather than day by day. I know the media cycle is every 24 hours, but I, as a citizen and as a physician, am very assured that vaccines will be coming within the quarterly requirements that the government has made with the vaccine providers. I think we all have to help Canadians understand that they are coming. You are going to get your vaccine. And in the meantime, just do your best not to get infected and to keep your family safe.
So am I hearing correctly then that other countries that perhaps are ahead of us in the short term negotiated monthly delivery routines or weekly? So we don't know. We don't have access to the contracts. Is that what you're saying? Canada negotiated quarterly returns, so the manufacturers are backloading this, whereas other countries negotiated contracts that provided for a sooner delivery point within that quarterly time frame?
The details of the procurement arrangements are not known to me, but in general, I think they are on these quarterly timelines. There are other factors that are at play, such as do you have already domestic biomanufacturing on your soil, or a local candidate that could be manufactured quickly using your own technology.
But are there not countries that don't have manufacturing capabilities or on their own soil access to a vaccine similar to the Canadian situation we find ourselves in that are also ahead of us, on that list of 30 or 50, depending how you measure the countries? I keep coming back to that because that's what I hear when I go back to my riding.
Yeah. And some of those vaccines are, for example, the Russian vaccine, the Gamaleya Institute vaccine, is not a vaccine that's in our portfolio. It was, it became authorized, as it were, very early without any publicly available data for any scientists to evaluate. And those countries would also be included in these metrics that we're seeing in the press.
Thank you. I would ask you this actually to any of the three witnesses. I'm assuming, and I know we'll be pushing for a review of this whole process post-pandemic. Hindsight is 2020. I'd be the first to admit that. But at this stage, this far in, would you have any responses to what perhaps a post-review would uncover?
So MP Epp, you're out of time, but I will ask the witnesses if they could quickly, within 10, 15 seconds, answer that, and then we'll go to the last round.
Thank you. I would just quickly say that I think it's become very clear that the Earth is one country and that we have to think about preparedness for emerging infectious diseases as a planet. And our countries are very much interdependent. I very much applaud the ability to build domestic biomanufacturing, and I think that is necessary, and we've learned that, I think, during this pandemic. But we also have to account for the fact that we have to work together with other countries. Mark?
Unfortunately, we really need to get to the next round. MP Amos?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our witnesses. You are, and your committee members are all heroes in my view. I think Canadians owe you an enormous debt of gratitude. I mean, I've had the opportunity to discuss on many occasions with our chief science advisor the nature of the work that you are doing. She in her ex officio capacity on your task force. It is simply tremendous, and I find it most regrettable how certain politicians and certain members of the media are choosing to politicize this for what I think is very short-term gains, when what you guys are really helping us look at is the short, medium, and long-term needs of our country around vaccines. I want to get on the record the issue of any budgetary parameters. Were you in any way limited in your mandate in terms of looking at vaccines within constraints of particular financial aspects, or were you just said just best advice, money's no object?
So we provided our advice based on the best advice available. We did not, while some of the companies would talk about the financial considerations during presentations, that was not taken into consideration when we provided our advice.
Thank you for that. The member for Carleton earlier commented that his view was that the lack of domestic production was a domestic failure. What is your view with respect to the current state of domestic production? What could anything more have been done to create a circumstance where once we had known that there was a global pandemic, to have gotten to have moved faster to generate more domestic production?
I think in the short run, the decisions were taken that made sense. There clearly is an issue to be addressed going forward, and that is underway through recommendations of the Joint Biomanufacturing Subcommittee to the government. Some announcements have been made, as you know, for Canadian domestic production capability. I expect more are underway and more to come, but I don't think anything could have been done in terms of supplying vaccines between now and the end of September. There is not a domestic solution that could have sped that up.
That's a very important statement. I do hope our members opposite in the media take note of that. Do any of our other expert witnesses have further comments on that point?
I would just be in agreement. We had on our committee experts in this area who are aware of the global situation and the time it takes to actually get a plant running a new vaccine and to do the transfer. And that was our conclusion.
Thank you. On the issue of CanSino, there is a false narrative being peddled that Canada somehow put all of its eggs in the CanSino basket. What is your opinion on that kind of narrative?
Joanne and I believe Roger spoke to that earlier, so I'll just add my comments as well. Well, CanSino was very much part of what was talked about. It's kind of early on and later on. Any discussions we had were done in parallel. All the other vaccine candidates that we looked at were considered at the same time, and none of the decisions around CanSino impacted the timing of any other decisions. It wasn't waiting for one to get to the other. At least from the time the vaccine task force was put in place, we looked at all of those things from the beginning when we met. We looked at all of the potential candidates, domestic candidates and international candidates, starting at that time. And again, as we said, we looked at them in parallel, not sequentially.
With respect to certain Canadian companies that have perhaps not been selected, should Canadians have expected, and is it normal and appropriate for certain companies to have been chosen by the government to advance to receive funding, and for certain companies to have not received funding or lesser funding? Is that normal and appropriate in your opinion?
We had a process to review the strategic investment fund proposals that looked at all companies equally. We've talked about the criteria we used to assess those proposals, and we provided advice to the government, and some funding announcements have been made under strategic investment fund proposals. There's also been other funding. In some cases, we thought the proposals were not at a stage for SIF funding, but would be benefit by other funding. And so there's also been a series of fundings made by the NRC IRAP program and the Next Generation Fund. So a number of Canadian companies have received funding from the government to advance their candidate vaccines and their programs at that, which are at an earlier stage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all three of you.
So that ends our third round of questions, and I want to thank the witnesses for staying a little over time to answer all of the questions of our members. And on behalf of the INDU committee, I'd like to thank all three of you for the work that you're doing. Please extend our thanks to the other members of the task force, and thank you for what you're doing and going to continue to do for us here in Canada. And we really appreciate your time. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the clerk because we have an election of a vice chair to deal with. So with that, again, I will let the witnesses depart, and I will turn it over to the clerk. Thank you so much.
Merci pour votre présence.
Thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you. So we have an election of first vice chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
MP Dreeshen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Clerk, I'd be honored to nominate Mr. Polyev as vice chair.
It has been moved by Earl Dreeshen that Pierre Poilievre be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? Seeing none, it has been moved by Earl Dreeshen that Pierre Poilievre be elected as first vice chair of the committee pursuant to the House of Order of Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. I will now proceed to a recorded division unless we have unanimous consent.
Consent.
Looks pretty unanimous to me. I declare the motion carried and Pierre Poilievre duly elected as first vice chair of the committee. Oh.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. So I have some hands up, but is it a point of order, Mr. Lemire?
I just want to make sure that if we send him an email that he'll answer us. That's all I'm asking as a vice president, as a vice chair. That seems important. Maybe he doesn't want to give us his personal email because we're live. So maybe after the meeting we can ask him.
And MP Poilievre, we're happy to have you on board. With that, I wanted to just give an update to the committee on what we're working on because I know we have a lot of new members. So next week we have a meeting, obviously on Tuesday and Thursday. We had a few witnesses from the affordability and accessibility study that had not responded and or were not available when we were doing the 4 meetings earlier this year. So we reached out to them to see if there was any interest for them to be able to come for 1 hour. So next Tuesday, we will finalize the affordability and accessibility study. We will have with us from Québécois, Pierre-Carl Peledo, from Videotron, Jean-François Pruneau, and from Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology, Barry Field. So they will come for an hour. We will be able to finalize then that study. And afterwards, we will go into camera for some in-camera business to discuss, obviously giving instructions to the analyst with respect to that study and other business that we need to take care of. And on Thursday, we are continuing the domestic manufacture of vaccines with Dr. Mona Niemer, the Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister. And we have some other Medicago, and we have some other witness groups we're waiting to hear back from. So I just wanted to give the committee an idea of what we're looking at. So next week on Tuesday, when we are in camera business, I'd like for us to decide on the additional study that will come after the manufacturing of vaccines, so that we can give instructions to the clerk for witnesses and to line things up. So you should have received the motions, but what we'll do is we'll recirculate the study motions that were already approved. So that way we can be ready to have those conversations next week and decide as a committee what we'd like to focus on right after this study is completed. So is there any questions regarding that? And I'm just going to look at the clerk in case he'd like to clarify anything as well. Nope. Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, go ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be possible to have all of these elements by email? Maybe I'm more visual, but I missed the last person who is going to come speak to us next Thursday. Also, is it possible for us to suggest witnesses? Is it possible to suggest people from Medicago, for example? And on Tuesday, we're only going to have an hour. So would it be possible to have another person invited in case we have extra time? We don't have a deadline for the names of witnesses for the manufacturing study. So if you want to invite other people, please contact the clerk directly as quickly as possible because it's hard to schedule everyone when we do it at the last minute. So if you have other names of witnesses that you'd like to see, please send them to Mr. McPherson. We are going to send you meeting details as well as motions for the studies that have already been approved. So we'll be able to decide next Tuesday what we'll be doing afterwards. Thank you very much.
Comments? Seeing none, I will now therefore adjourn this meeting and I will see you all on Tuesday. Encore un gros merci à nos...
Once again, thank you to the interpreters as well as to our IT team. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you.